Hello and welcome to my Blender introductory video. In this video I'm going to show the base tools of Blender for people that already know how 3D works but have been working in other softwares such as Maya, Max, Modo or others. I'm going to show the basics of navigation, selection, modeling tools, shading and rendering, and also some of the 3D cursor, which is this circle which is by default in the middle of your screen. Just ignore it until we get there. It's a very useful thing. I will get started. Just keep in mind that in the bottom left corner I have a screencast add-on, so you can see any movements that I make and any key presses that I press. Also, this video was made mostly for my colleagues in House Digital Arts and Entertainment, but it is free for anyone that stumbles upon it to watch, and I hope it helps you. I hope you can learn something from it. Let's get started with navigation. By default in Blender you move around with the middle click by pressing and dragging, press on the scroll wheel, or by shift middle click. In case of emergency, if you cannot work with a mouse, you can always, or with a keyboard for the penning of course, you can always use the on-screen buttons. For example, you can rotate based on this 3D world, you can zoom and you can pan around, you can set to your active camera, or you can change from perspective to orthographic. Most settings that you will ever use are on the screen, but this doesn't mean that you should use them. Usually they're not used. I also hide the T menu, which is over here most of the times. Sometimes you might move around your viewport and it starts to become strange. You don't know how to get to your model to start working on it again, so you need to select it by clicking on it. Any selected object has a bright outline next to it, and you need to press the dot or delete key on your numpad, and that will send you to its main location. Now if you want to use the keybinds from other software such as Maya with alt click, you can always do that. I left it for now because I also want to show how to change the focus button to something more comfortable. I personally changed it to Shift F. So you go to Edit up here, Preferences, Key Map, and you search for Pan. You scroll down a little bit until you find 3D View, and in 3D View you have Shift middle mouse. You click on it and you make the keybind that you want for panning around, and then after you set this you can search for rotate, and here the 3D view, the second option is middle mouse. You change this middle mouse to, I don't know, alt click, whatever you use. And for the focus button, it's actually much easier for me to just search it. It's in 3D view, 3D view global. You scroll down until you see this dark button, and right above it, it is dot or delete on the numpad at the second frame selected. So you click on it, and if you want to follow my hotkey, I recommend Shift F. Talking about hotkeys, I don't recommend using the industry standard, also known as the Maya hotkeys for Blender, because you're going to follow tutorials on YouTube maybe, and you won't know how to do the things that they are doing in the video, because you're not using the proper hotkeys. Another very useful thing for modeling, you have some buttons on your numpad which you can press to go to orthographic views from top, bottom, side, and front, back, and so on. I don't have a numpad, but I don't feel as if I'm missing anything, because you can also click on Alt and drag with your middle click to move as if you're on a phone, to move between perspectives. And you can see on the top left corner that it shows you in which view you are right now, and you can get out of it by simply rotating out of it. This is pretty much everything that you need for navigation. Let's move on to selection. Selection is pretty easy. You just click on it and it is selected. There are a few more supple details. I can show them in edit mode. Let's duplicate this cube with Shift D for duplicating and moving them on the x-axis. I can move them wherever I want. I just wanted to mention that it is possible to move them in any axis that you want, like this. And you can also in that change the amount that you move it in. For example, if you look in the top left corner, you see those numbers, and you can, while moving them, you can input on your keyboard something like 3, and it moves exactly 3 units. You also have this menu over here. You can change it from 3 meters to 3 inches, and it will be 0.0762 meters. Yep, you can select multiple objects than just one by pressing Shift, and also you can select objects in your catalog menu. This thing over here shows all of the objects that are currently viewed in your scene. Objects act as little folders, so if you click on them you see everything that is involved in them. For now this thing only has a mesh, but you can also add a modifier, for example, like subdivision, so it adds a modifiers tab, and so on. You can do a bunch of stuff to add there. In Blender, object mode is not the thing that you work in. You need to work on your object in edit mode to edit the object that you have. So I suggest that you do most of your editing in edit mode, because the transforming tools in object mode are reserved for the things that you might want to undo for arrangement in a scene, not for actual modeling. So if I wanted to make this a long stick, I cannot just scale it up. I will show how to do this in the modeling part of it. You can go to edit mode. In this tab, the most important ones are edit mode, object mode, and sculpt mode. If you are going to sculpt, I personally never use that. Those 3 are very rarely used. They are not that important, but Blender developers know that edit mode is the most accessed mode, so you can easily switch between them by pressing tab. So by pressing tab, this is edit mode. You can realize that it's edit mode. Right now you can select individual vertices. With Shift I can select multiple of them. Let's subdivide it a little bit just to add more geometry so I can show the selection tips. This is a subdivided cube. Right now we can only select vertices. We might want to select edges. In this case we press on 2, and now everything is in edge mode. You can see it in here. You can also click on it to select between vertices, edges, and faces, by the way, but it is a waste of time to go with your cursor up there, so it's best to press 1, 2, and 3 to be able to select all of that you want. You can again select with Shift to have multiple selections, and you can also select with Control, which will calculate a route from something that you have selected until something else. So if I want to select a loop of vertices, like this shape that I have over here, I just do it with Control. If I want to select a loop, I Alt click on a loop, but I changed it to double click because I feel like it's more comfortable. If you want to Alt click to select a loop, you can do that, but if you want to double click, I changed it in Edit Preferences, somewhere here in Input, Emulate 3-button mouse. This setting allows me to select loops in vertex mode, edge mode, and face mode. And the way that you select the ones that you want is by pressing on the opposite line of it. So if I want to select this one, I click on this horizontal line. If I want to select a horizontal loop, I click on the vertical line, like this. You also do it the opposite way with edges, and for vertices it's the same with edges. It might sound complicated, but it's really not. You just get used to it the more you work with it. You have some settings in the select tab here. They are not very used, not all of them. There are some fun ones like checker deselect. It selects only a part of your whatever you have selected. Right now, if I have faces, checker deselect, it makes it a checkerboard, and I can model based on this checkerboard. You just delete the faces and have it like this. And another important tool here that I use sometimes, you might not have a use for it as a beginner, is select loops, select boundary loop, and it only selects the edges on the boundary. There are a few more pretty important tools there, but I think that those are pretty much the most important basic ones that you need to know. There is also, if you press W, right now I can box select, but if you press W, you change it to circle select, lasso select, and slide adjustments, which I don't use, I just move them normally. But you can also press on C to get a circle select and scroll up and down to select more or less. If you select something from your viewport, you will only be able to select what you see, ignoring other objects, and not what is behind. So if you want to select your entire object by box selecting, you won't be able to do it like this. You need to go into X-ray mode, which can be accessed if you press Alt Z. And if you have Alt Z, it will select everything. And I can also select faces from the back, like this. Another important tool for selection, which you might find useful, is that if you press Ctrl plus, I think I changed my keybind. Your plus might be the one from the numpad. Not exactly sure. Anyway, if you press Ctrl plus, you select a face or a vertex or a line next to the one that you already have selected. And if you press Ctrl minus, it's less than you have selected. I'm not really sure if our keybinds are the same here, so if I'm saying anything wrong, if it doesn't work with you, write a message in the comments. I will look at it. Also, in the circle select that I have shown, or any other type of selection, you can always Control drag with the box selection, or you can use the circle selection with middle click to deselect stuff that you have. So if you have those faces that you want to select but not the middle ones, you just middle click and deselect them. Instead of having to go with control all around, it's much easier to do it with a circle. One thing that I forgot to mention in this is that you can always select everything linked. For example, if you have one vert connected to the whole thing, you can select everything on Ctrl L, which selects everything that is linked to whatever you have selected. It doesn't only work with one object, you can do it with multiple objects. And you can also select everything selected by hovering over something that is not selected at all and pressing L from linked. If you want to find out if you have any endgoals in your model, you need to first make sure that you are in face mode. You need to go to select, all by trait, faces by sides, and now it will select every face that is equal to 4. You can also make it smaller than 4 to find the triangles, You can also make it greater than 4, which finds the n-gons. And that is an easy fix. I don't know, you can triangulate it with Control T, with triangulation. Yes. Next, we have modeling tools. They are very complex. I might forget a few and then just edit some more later. Let's start from some normal cubes. Okay, modeling. First of all, we need to know how to manage, how to move and do stuff to our object in object mode before jumping to edit mode. So if you press G, you will be able to grab and move it around. If you press R, you will be able to rotate, and if you press S, you will be able to scale. But I set some shortcuts, and instead of doing it instantly, I get those little gizmos, which you can set by right-click on it, assign shortcut, and pressing the key G, R, S, grab, rotate, scale. And now when I do this in object mode, I can do it way more accurately than in edit mode. In edit mode you can do the same, but by default they are not set as an object mode, so you need to change them again. I didn't want to change them because I only find them useful in object mode. Okay, so we can select whatever we want and we can practice some movement. Here is moving a vertex wherever we want. Some most important tools that I use every single day is, first of all, X to delete. I just deleted that face. I can delete vertices, which will end up deleting all of those faces that are connected to these vertices. I can delete edges, which will leave some edges but will still delete most stuff. And I can delete faces, which is not that destructive. And now that we have an open place, we can extrude like this. So when I have something like this, I can use merge at center or at last or at first, depending on which one I select. For example, here I merge at first, first one selected. Besides extrude, there are also options like insert. In Maya, you have the insert not as a separate tool, it's part of the extrude, since you can extrude with an insert. Here it's not the same. You press I and you make an intrusion, and also it works like this, but if you want to have them on each individual face, you press I again and you make the insert on each individual face. Depends on what you want to do, really. You can extrude based on normal, so if I press Alt E, I can extrude from different settings. I mostly use this along normals to extrude along normals like this. Sometimes I might want to make this flat. There is an add-on which you can enable and edit preferences, add-ons, and search for loop tools and enable this. It allows you to right click and flatten. Sometimes it bugs out, so you need to Control Z, by the way. It's just an add-on problem. You can also do this with circles. This is not an ideal circle. Let's add some stuff here. Now we have enough sides. I can make a circle and I can scale down. This is the alternative of circularize in Maya. You can also do stuff like space with this tool, which will place the vertices at an equal spacing between each other. If you want to connect two vertices, if you want to make a line between them, you press J from join. You can do this between larger segments as well, and it will try its best. But sometimes, like if I want to make them like this specifically, I want to use the knife tool, which is on K. As you have figured already, everything is intuitive. G from grab, K from knife, R from rotate. And you press enter when you are done with the cut to apply it. You can also hold it to cut wherever your mouse goes, and then you press enter again to apply. You can also, if you want to make multiple cuts, you press right click to start a new cut, and you start it and you make as many as you want, independent. When you're done, just press enter. There is one tool that I really like, which is bevel. Control B. You can make it, and you can scroll your mouse to increase the amount of edges that it makes. And then if you want any more loops like this, we can add them with Control R. It places it directly in the middle, and you can also scroll to add as many equally placed edges as you want. If you want to move it a little bit, you need to click, and then it allows you to move it wherever you want. If you want to move one after the tool ends, you need to press GG. G from grab and then G again to slide based on an edge. It allows you to move anything based on edges that are close to it, such as this vertex here. If you want to snap, there is the snap tool up there. I always have it on vertex. The default increment is not that useful. You don't need to click on this magnet. It makes your work harder. You just click on G from grab. You press on the axis that you want to snap it on, or unless you want to put it directly in the place of that vertex. In my case, it's the X axis. And then I hold Control and hover over that vertex that I want to snap on. So right now I snapped it back to where it was, because I used the X location of this vertex. I can also move it vertically if I want and snap it here, and now it's a flat line, at least this one, not the faces around it, but I can continue if I want. If you want to dissolve an edge, you have edges which you don't need anymore. You can select all of it in edge mode. Don't do this in vertex mode. It will do a mess like this. You don't even know what's going on. Do it in edge mode so you don't have n-gons all over. Right now the inside of the mesh is clean. And then press Ctrl X for dissolving. There is one useful tool that is called shear. I use it sometimes. It doesn't have a easy hotkey. It's Shift Control Alt S. You don't need to remember this. I don't really. It's complicated. And you can shear it like this. If you have a face like this one, let's make it harder to model. For example, something like this. I can duplicate it wherever I want. As long as it has as many sides as that one, it's okay. You select both of them and you do a bridge. For now, I forgot the key for bridge. I just use F3, which is the search option, and you search for bridge. And I find out that it's on Control E. So I press Control E and I get a bunch of settings for this. And I search for bridge, which is bridge edge loops. Now I can connect both faces with each other. I can add some segments. I can edit the smoothness of it to whatever I want. One is usually the best. Also a very useful tool. And if I had, let's say, a bunch of, let's subdivide this, not this. Let's subdivide this. If I had a bunch of faces to fill, I would need to select them and press F. And if I did this with every single one, it's really tedious, really annoying. I don't want to do that. The easy way that Blender allows me to work in is that I only need to do it once, and then I click on this edge over here, and I can press F. and it fills the next one. F, 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 F. You can also, if you have a lot of it, you can hold it and it will do it for you. So if you have a circle with 128 points and you bridge one, you can just hold it so it gets filled automatically. You don't have to do it by yourself. And sometimes, in this case, we could have used the bridge tool. Sometimes you are not able to do this thing in specific situations. Now that we are in object mode, I want to show some differences between object mode and edit mode. So if I were to scale this cube up to like 3 and bevel everything, you can see how ugly the bevel is. It's not equal. This happens because it takes the scale of the object into consideration. This is why if I wanted to have it vertical, I would just do it in edit mode and then I would bevel to get this perfect thing. But if you actually did it in object mode and you don't know what to do because it happened too long ago and you can't get rid of this, you need to apply F3 and write apply scale. Sometimes rotation is also needed, but not all the time, so you just apply it. Or if you want to undo the scale, you can just Alt S. Alt S, Alt R, Alt G. Let's show it with some rotation here and some scale. Alt S clears the scale, Alt R clears the rotation, Alt G clears the position of it. The position is important, it's based on the origin point. This is why you don't want to get your model and move it around in edit mode, because the origin point will stay here and you will need to edit your object based on this origin point. You can also easily right click and set origin to 3D cursor, which is there. I will show how to move it later, or set origin to geometry. So this kind of fixes it, but still it's a good practice to model directly in your origin point at the base of the map. There are some modifiers that you can have, for example, subdivision surface. I apply it with control 1, 2 and 3. It depends on how many subdivisions you want. And if you want more, you can always just go to modifiers and increase the number to whatever you want. I hope you can't hear the dog outside. There is a dog barking. I returned home and I hear those at night sometimes. So I love subdivision in Blender because it works like this in edit mode. You can work on something and you can see how your object is getting transformed in subdivision while directly working on it. And if you don't like this, sometimes I don't, you can click on this button over here at edit mode and disable it only for edit mode. If you hover on it, you can see it. And if you go on object mode back again, if you want to edit another object next to it, this one will stay subdivided. If you want to hide it from even this one, you just need to press on viewport and then it will fix it. Sometimes you might have duplicate vertices in some points. Let's make an example. I extrude. By the way, in Blender, if you press right click, you might cancel the action. Sometimes it cancels, for example, a rotation of something. If I rotate and I press right click. But for stuff like extrusions, they are already applied, but they you cancel the movement of them. So looking at this right now, it's two vertices in one single point. This thing can cause huge problems. For example, here in subdivision it causes this. I don't think you want your object to look like this. I hope so, at least. So if you have this sort of situation, when your model looks like this, you need to press on M, which is merge, and merge by distance. And also have everything selected. You select everything by pressing A. You can also deselect everything by double pressing A. Now I remember something that I need to show in selection, so I need to edit it a little bit. Be right back. The last thing that is important to show in this video related to modeling is that you can always, besides duplicating, you can always separate them into separate objects by pressing P and separating based on selection. Material is less used, or loose parts. If I press loose parts, every single one of them becomes its own individual object. You can also see it in the catalog. But if I can also Control J to join them in one object, and as I said, you can also separate based on selection like this. It doesn't have to be a whole object, a whole mesh. You can just do it with a single face. I think even with a line or a vertex. Let's see if it works. Yep, I have a single vertex here. And of course you can add stuff with Shift A if I didn't mention it already, and add a bunch of primitives. You might have less than me because I have some add-ons, but trust me, those are truly enough. I never need to add whatever this is. I never use them, although I can make a diamond, which is pretty cool. Let's get to the 3D cursor. As I mentioned before, the 3D cursor is this white and red cursor that is in the origin point of our map by default, but we have a multitude of ways of moving it and also using it. In this part of the video, I'll show you how to set origin points of object based on 3D cursor, how to scale, rotate, or move based on the 3D cursor, how to also use those things, this and this, which is transform orientation and transfer pivot point. I will start first with showing how to place the 3D cursor. The easiest way to do it is by holding Shift and pressing right click. It is placing it in our viewport like this. It is very inaccurate. I don't usually use this unless I want to quickly select a part of my 3D map and add a cube or something, because everything that I add in my scene starts from the 3D cursor. If I wanted to scale my object from the bottom, so like a ladder, a normal ladder, right now I'm using it based on its origin point, but let's say that the origin point was put somewhere else, for example this side. I cannot do that. Now it scales it and moves it and rotates it from the middle, which I don't want to. So now, how do we put the origin point in that position again? You can do that by using the 3D cursor. You select this and this face, and then you need to open the 3D cursor menu, which is Shift S. And you can put the cursor to selected. It will approximate the location of all of the vertices that I have selected and put the 3D cursor in the average of them, which is here. Then I go to object mode, right click, set origin to 3D cursor, and I can scale based on this or rotate based on that thing again. I can also rotate in edit mode based on that thing. By default, if I try to do it, it rotates based on the median point. It calculates the middle point of all of the vertices that I have here. as I have selected here median point. But you can also change it to something like active. So if you made this face active, everything would rotate based on this, or based on this face, or based on this face. And also 3D cursor. I can rotate based on where my 3D cursor is. Individual origin is also an important one that I use sometimes when I want to add different details. So if I were to add some more faces here, select all of these and inset in each. I want to extrude and rotate each of them individually. Right now it's in individual points, so I can rotate each line based on itself. On the default median point it would do something like this, which I guess looks kind of cool from this perspective, but it's not really what we want, and the mesh is a disaster. So you can always use individual origins, insert, move, rotate a little bit, and do whatever you want basically. Also scale, you can scale based on individual origin, and I doubt there is any other way than using that thing. I've never used bounding box, I don't think it's that useful, and that's about it here. You can also access that part by pressing the comma button. You don't need to, oh, not the comma, the dot, I'm sorry, the dot button. Instead of going all the way there in your viewport, you can do it way faster by pressing the dot. And the comma shows something else, shows this thing, transform orientation. I can move my transform orientation based on global, view, cursor, or local, or normal. I don't know how the gimbal is really used, I've never used it in my time. The normal is rotating everything based on a normal. I insisted on showing how to do this because let's say I have this ladder rotated a little bit and I want to make it longer. I can move those with Alt S to scale based on normal, but then I cannot do anything with the ladder steps. If I try to move it on the side, it moves like this. I can try to do it manually, but it will never be perfect. So what I can do is move based on normal. I select that normal and I put the normal that I'm going to use as the active element. Right now it was median point, so it calculated the normals of all of my faces, and in the end it ended up being just like global. So I activated the normal based on the active element. Now I can duplicate, press on an axis I want to move in, and here I am moving it on the axis of that side. So this face that I have selected as active is showing its normal in this direction, so I can move there, there, or in my direction here. The local mode setting is also very useful. Recently I have rotated it specifically in object mode. I did this on purpose, just so I can demonstrate it. I moved this one on the comma to local mode. You can see that the gizmo is also a little bit different. It's not as if it would be when it is global. It rotated as well. So I can go to edit mode, and all of my transforms are based on the rotation that I already had. So I can flip this ladder around. I can rotate on the x-axis and also the z one, which is I guess the same for both local and global in this specific example, but the others are very individual, which would not happen in a global mode. Let's show the difference in global. In global it would rotate like this and like this. and the eye is the same. Now it is time to move to shading. Okay, let's get to shading. I have brought an object I modeled a long time ago just to showcase something. Shading is almost as important as modeling, but it can be fixed in a way faster rate than modeling. I see a lot of people focusing only on the modeling and not paying any attention to this, and it's a waste, because you might make a great model, but it could have some bad shading that you don't know how to fix or don't want to fix, and that brings the overall quality down and wastes the time that you have spent modeling it. Even some AAA games have shading issues which are really easily fixable. And I'm not saying this to try to encourage you to commit them. It's very valuable to know how to deal with vertex normals and shading in general. First of all, I want to recommend a setting that I have enabled in the upper right corner. I have cavity put on both. It can make the difference between a flat looking model and a more detailed looking model. It adds those edges on sharp corners like this one, so it makes the object way more readable. And I use it all the time to help me understand the model better. Okay, so first of all, in Blender you have right click shade smooth or shade flat. Those are usually never used. Shade flat just basically shades flat everything that you have like this. And shade smooth shades everything smooth, which is also something you don't want to. So if you had a cube, you wouldn't want it to be smooth. It would look like a cloud, and that's not really good. What I always use is auto smooth, and if you have it to something like 60 degrees, it shades everything, every angle under 60 degrees as smooth, and everything else, such as this thing which is 90 degrees, as sharp. I usually don't like relying on the algorithm though. I just pump it to 180, which is everything, and I mark my sharps by myself. Let's disable the show of seams right now. The blue things are sharps. You can mark them by selecting an edge or some vertices, but it's better with edges, and pressing Ctrl E and mark sharp, and it will mark whatever you selected as sharp. So if I were to get those faces here and mark everything sharp, it would look as the one that I showed when I shaded everything sharp. So the best thing to do, in my opinion, is just to mark them yourself. I did that inside, so I know that everything in my model is smooth except those parts, because I didn't want to waste geometry, so I didn't make a bevel here. Still, the shading looks pretty bad right now, as you can see. It has those things, although my faces are completely flat. What you could do to fix the shading is just select everything and mark it as sharp, and that would partially, oops, not seam, mark sharp, and this could partially fix your shading, but it's not the ideal way because it leaves those ugly lines. The best way to do it would be using something called the weighted normal modifier. You just go there and press W, or you can simply click here. Oh, I forgot I didn't have my screencast. Here it is. And it partially helps the situation. One thing that you need is keep sharps, so it keeps the sharps that you have marked. And if you look from afar to your model, it helps it a lot, but it still has some problems there. Weighted normal is best for almost every single object that you do, except if you subdivide something, you should always use it, almost all the time. It's a non-destructive way to improve the shading of your object 1,000 times. And the way to fix those things is to mess with the power of the vertices. Right now, weighted normals weight them around equally, everything, all of the faces equally. What we need to do is pick those edges on the bevel, select all of them. I think I selected all of them before, and you need to, let's see, weak. Those are all of the faces that I needed to have selected in this case. There are a lot because I have this Picatinny rail. It would be a lot easier otherwise. And just press Alt N. Alt N is the normal menu. You will need it a lot for flipping normals. You can Shift N to recalculate, by the way. Sometimes you might have shading like this and you don't understand what's going wrong. Why does it look like this? It's because your normals are flipped. You can check it in the upper right corner here. You click on face orientation and everything should be blue. If it's not blue, then your face is inverted. You can check how it works on a cube, for example. If I delete the top face, of course, this part will be blue, the other part will be red. It's inverted, flipped normals. Well, here everything is right. Also, if you have everything as this, you can just Shift N to recalculate normals and it just calculates them on the outside. Let's close this face orientation. Now we can select all of those. I'll just select a few because I already assigned them, but you should select all of your weak edges. Alt N and set face strength to weak, because everything else that you have, like this thing, should be face strength strong. And not select, set face strength strong, yes. And now the shading is still the same. We need to activate face influence and look how much of a difference it makes. Without the modifier and with the modifier. Weighted normal is the absolute best modifier in the entire software of Blender. This thing is such a powerful tool and can help you improve your shading 1,000 times. We can also check it in here. We can display the normals that we have. Those are the point normals. A point is one of those. A vertex is something that's assigned to a face. So in this case, because this vertex creates 4 faces, well, this point creates 4 faces, it's technically 4 vertices. It's just 3D theory. But yeah, the average of their orientation is this line here. And you can see, wait, what? Oh yeah, I needed to enable this to see the cage inside the modifier. You can see how weighted normal moves it to improve the shading on the model. It's subtle, but if you look at the top, now everything is pointing upwards. Same here, everything is pointing on the side, and without it, it's just a mess and the shading looks bad. Weighted normals does a lot for your shading. Some other thing that you need to keep into consideration is that everything in 3D is a triangle. So if you're going to export something with quads or n-gons, they are going to get triangulated in the backend. Right now, this n-gon is an actual set of triangles, but we don't see it. But that's because the backend of Blender calculates them in a way, although there is no guarantee that by exporting it to another software, it will be triangulated the same way. So the best way to export something is by triangulating it, but of course you don't want your object to look like this. You want a clean topology with quads, maybe a few triangles here and there, no n-gons, but you don't really want this with triangles everywhere. You cannot even select tools like this. So another way to add triangles without messing the topology is by adding the triangulation modifier. You just press there and press T, or you can select it, but I never select, I just press T from triangulation. Of course, it destroys the shading because we didn't select keep normal. So right now our model looks like this. I'm using an add-on hard ops for this menu. I don't know if there is a wireframe without it. Maybe oh damn, I messed it up. Maybe I should show without it. I think it's possible in yes, wireframe view. Wireframe view shows it perfectly. Meanwhile, if I am in edit mode, I don't see it. I can just disable it, by the way, here, so it doesn't show up in edit mode. So in object mode I see all the triangles, meanwhile in edit mode I work with quads. That is the best way to create a low poly. In case you want to bake a high poly on it, you need to have it triangulated when you bake on it, and you need to have good normals, at least as good as you can. And please never leave a sharp without a seam. Sharp marks or harden marks in Maya are only supposed to be used on seams. If you don't use it on a seam, you get some bad results. I'm going to open a file that I worked on before and show you what exactly it does. Alright, this is an example of a bake that I done on a low poly that is not mine. This is the FAMAS from Counter-Strike Global Offensive. I have made a high poly based on this model and baked it on top of it, but sadly I cannot modify the low poly. When Valve made this game in 2012, I think it was released, it did not have normal maps. It was a game without normal maps, so they could afford using sharps everywhere. And then they couldn't change it because they would mess up a lot of skins. So they left it be like it was. You can set all of the seams by doing seams from islands. So now I place the seams based on the unwrap that I already have. So what a sharp without a seam does, for example here, is this sharp line. If not for the sharp line, this would be a smooth transition, but because of the sharp, it creates those dark spots everywhere, also visible in this. This is a sharp without a seam. It could have been a smooth shaded part. Same here, the sharp basically destroys everything. So it is best practice to never mark sharps like this and try to keep everything as smoothly shaded through bevels, micro bevels at least, rather than sharps. By micro bevels I mean stuff like this. It could have easily saved the shading of the model without having to mark sharps. Of course, it's also based on how many polygons you can afford to spend. If you're doing a ultra low poly game, I don't think that you are necessarily aimed towards normal maps, so that's fine. Just don't do it whenever you make the low poly, high poly workflow. Back to our old project. There are also baked vertex normals. I'm not talking about the maps, the purplish ones, but the lines inside your vertices. When I work with stuff in Blender, I do it non-destructively because it's way easier. However, it doesn't really work like that whenever I want to export or import an FBX. Whenever you import an FBX into your program, all of the vertex normals are baked. I applied all of my vertex normals, which were so far procedural, to show you a disaster that would happen if you tried to edit something that has baked vertex normals. For example, I extrude this. This is what happens. I can add sharps to try to fix it, but it won't really do much. It does this washy shading here, which is not that great, and you're not going to start to mark everything as sharp. Even if I do a bevel, it still looks pretty weird. So the way to fix it would be pretty much to start doing the vertex normals from the start. You would need to redo all of them. Luckily they don't take that much time, but good luck. I hope that you don't have this many bevels on your object as I do. You need to go to this data properties tab, go to geometry data and clear custom split normals data. You need to do it whenever you import an object from somewhere else and want to work on it, otherwise the shading will get destroyed. So now we're back to the original shading and we would need to set it all over again. However, the normals won't be broken, so whenever I import something I just clear it and I redo it. It's the best possible way, but of course it's extra work and that sucks. A way to check your vertex normals to see if your shading is good, it doesn't only apply to low poly but also to subdivided models, is by changing around the matte cap. I think that by default you have this thing on, however I work with the first matte cap usually. You can select from a range of matte caps, which some of them are really trippy. I usually use the Studio Light car paint looking one to check the shading, to see all of those things. This one specifically helps me understand my model a lot better. So if I have this thing on and I move it and I still see an octagon without it being warped, then it means that the shading is good. And then you just go back, because this one is pretty hard to model with, and you can go and play around with them. If those are not up to your liking, I think you can go to Edit, Preferences, Lights, and install some matte caps that you have, if you have any files, or search for some on the internet. This one looks like the default ZBrush one. Apparently some people really hate it, so I'm gonna keep it here just to trigger them. I think that was it when it comes to shading. I will move on to rendering. For the end chapter I want to show how to render in Blender and also some of the menus of this software which I haven't shown before. I just set up a cube and a rendering environment. I will show how to add a camera and light. All of them are in Shift A. You can add a camera. The harder part is how to actually move it. Right now it's under the ground, so you can always move it like this. Of course, rotating, although it's pretty awkward, so here is where the problem intervenes. You need to click on this button to go into render mode and zoom in a little bit so those borders fit as much of your screen as possible without going off screen, so you understand it at all times. If you want, you can also go into those settings for the camera at viewport display, I think, composition guides. You can even apply the rule of thirds to make an interesting composition. You can change the resolution of the camera in the third option here, resolution X and resolution Y. So if I wanted to make it 2000 per 2000, I can just do it here. Also here I can modify my samples. Right now I have 4000, that's a lot. A fun thing that you can do here is that you can do math directly in those boxes. I don't have to think about the object that I want to make. I can just /16 and it will calculate it for me. This is a low enough sample amount that will allow me to do some test renders really fast. Recently Blender also used the denoise option here. It didn't used to exist. You used to need to add them with nodes like I did, but if it's here, I don't think anyone needs necessarily to learn how to do it like that anymore. You can lock your viewport to, or well, your camera to the viewport by pressing N for the N menu and clicking here in the view tab. And now whenever you move your camera, whenever you move your viewport, your camera will also follow. I can focus on this cube and move it here. Do something like this maybe. And I can get out of the camera by pressing again on that button or unlocking my camera and rotating around. I like to have my camera dynamic if I haven't chosen a final option already, so I usually just let it be able to move and just click on the button. You can edit the focal length of the camera also if you want. I don't want to do that right now. I can cancel my movements by pressing left click, by the way, and that allows me to change it as if nothing ever was changed at all. We need lights to be able to render. By default we have some default world lights which I don't really like. I disable them in the shading tab. Here is the material tab. I use it all the time for creating materials, but it also has a world setting. And in the world setting you have this background thing. I'll just turn it to 0. I don't really need it. Although if you want an HDRI, you can always just drag and drop from your folder into here and input it into the color and modify the strength for your HDRI. That's a good use of this node. If I'm here anyway, I'm just going to give it some basic material. Let's say I want to make it pink like this. I want to make it very glossy, so roughness 0.169. And I want to make it metallic. There are also some settings like normal. You can add either a normal or a bump. Those are two different options that you can add. I'm not going to add anything right now. Oops, not normal. You need to add a normal map. I'm just doing it for the presentation's sake. By bump, you just need to put a black and white image into height. And for normal, you need to input something into color. Let me search for a normal map real fast because there is such setting you need to change on it. Okay, I'm back. I dragged and dropped this file into my workspace, and now what I need to do, it's very important, you need to change the color space from sRGB to non-color. I have no idea why I still need to do that, but it's necessary in order to have a clean normal representation, and then you plug that into the normal map. Of course, right now it makes absolutely no sense because I picked a random normal map that I made on something else and I slapped it here. You would normally need to apply your own normal map and UV unwrap around it. I just did it for the presentation's sake. And sometimes they might have their green channel flipped. Normal maps are either DirectX or OpenGL. Blender is by default OpenGL, and the only difference between them is that DirectX has flipped green channels. So if you want to work with a DirectX, you can still convert them to OpenGL by adding RGB curves in the middle, going to G from green, moving this corner up and that corner down. And this is how you convert OpenGL or a DirectX map to the opposite. You can always also mute your nodes by pressing M from mute, any node ever. So I can just pretend that this normal map never even existed. Let's try adding some lights. I'm back in my layout mode. I can add Shift A light and spot or point. Points are usually cheaper to do than points because they're like 6 points or something, but right now it's a small scene, so it doesn't really matter. We can do whatever we want. Then I go into my camera and I go to view, rendered view, and I just increase it to be able to see it. I can rotate. I can add another point light. So the basic of free point light is that you have a rim light. Right now my rim light is working. I can even rotate it a little bit. In local mode it's not easier, I rotated it weirdly. One thing that is cool in Blender is that you can manage your windows however you want. So if I were to click in this corner and drag it a little bit, you're probably not going to be able to do it in the first try. It takes some exercise. But you can drag another viewport, so you can have in one screen your render viewport and in the other one your normal viewport. And to save some space from those tools, just press T, because that's the toolbar. So T from toolbar, of course. I'm going to try to make this as a fill light, as weak as I can, just so the shape can be understood. And then I'm going to make a key light while hiding that one, which is 30. 30 degrees from your camera, around there. Maybe more powerful. The spotlight just makes it a little bit weird, so it's way better as a larger one. Softer shadows. Perfect. So now that we have a setup for our lighting, we can render. If we made an animation, we can render an animation which will do all of the frames from what you have selected here from start to end. By the way, if you don't want this animation tab, you can just click on the corner either in the left or the right and drag it down like this. Just drag it down. You might accidentally split it into two and then you will have to do it again, but that's the price of learning. I also believe that they should improve it a little bit. So I will render image. It renders what I have in my camera, and then because I have my denoise option turned on, it will also denoise my object. So you see those little spots here. No more spots. And now that we have a render that we want, we just save. We save it on your computer, JPEG, PNG, whatever you want. And you also have a compositing tab in which you can set up stuff. I had the denoiser from the times when this thing wasn't a thing. If I delete it, it will sort of be the same. Yep, the same thing. That thing is not needed anymore. I should take it out of my default file. This is the basics of rendering. You don't really need to know rendering to use Blender. Blender is one of those softwares that has tools for everything, but it doesn't mean that everything is good in it. For example, one trick that I suggest you not to go into is that a lot of people get really into huge setups with nodes for Blender materials, procedural and stuff. And some people might contradict me on this. I just don't think that it is necessarily worth it. As a hobbyist it might be, if you just want to waste some time, have some fun. But in the industry no one really uses Blender procedural materials. So for that, of course, something like Substance Designer is better. For rendering you might not want to use cycles, you might want to use Marmoset, Unreal Engine if you're going for real time, or any other engine for rendering. From my personal experience, Maya Arnold has some easy to apply good render settings, although it's pretty annoying to work in. It's up to personal preference. I personally render everything in Blender. There is a sculpting tab. I can edit right here. I will select my object first, so I sculpt on it. And I will also need to apply the subdivision to have something to sculpt on, because right now the subdivision was just artificial. So sculpting, and I can start doing it. The controls are the same. For this thing, ZBrush is probably better than Blender, although it depends. There are some talented artists like Jan Sculpts that gave up on ZBrush and just do it in Blender. For my personal workflow, ZBrush has the tools that I need, like Dynamesh, Polish, Decimate, which this software does not have yet. Compositing, you might want to composite it here if you want it all in one software, but you might also do it in a video editor or Photoshop that is probably more documented than Blender, After Effects, DaVinci Resolve, and stuff like that. At the end of the day, I think Blender also has a video editing tab, which is pretty weird. I've never used it. It doesn't mean that you need to learn how to use it. It's a huge software and you will never get to do everything in it. There are also things like physics simulations here with force fields, cloth simulation. They could be useful, they could create good results, but for this, I think you can get better simulations in Houdini if you want to become a professional. And for clothing, there is Marvelous Designer if you want to do mainly that. If you want to do geonodes, there are geonodes in Blender now. It's a better deal to just learn Houdini and do it there. I'm not trying to discourage people from using Blender. I think it's a great all-in-one Swiss Army knife sort of application. I think its biggest strength is the modeling part of it. I personally have the easiest time from all applications in poly modeling and subdivision modeling. But of course, other applications also enter my workflow. I model some hard surface in Fusion 360. I texture in Substance Painter. I do procedural assets in Houdini. I sculpt and edit sculpting based stuff in ZBrush. And I bake in Marmoset Toolbag and so on. I really recommend this application purely for the modeling part of it. And I don't want to be misunderstood here. Going really fast into UV editing, there is also an UV editor in Blender. You can, by the way, one more thing for selection, you can press on the slash key next to your right shift and go to local mode so you can only see what you had selected. You can do your work in the UV editor by selecting what you need, wherever you need it. Something like this. You select what you need and you press on U from the UV menu and mark seam, and then you select everything and you unwrap. By default I have this thing on, which is UV sync selection, allows me to select either in 3D or in 2D and see what's going on. You can unwrap based on camera, I think. Camera project, project from view. I see that a lot of people are used with unwrapping like this. I've never done it, but I guess it's a thing, so you can do it if you want. You just mark your seams and you press unwrap, which is the my alternative of unfold. And that is pretty much it. I hope that this video was useful to you. And if anything wasn't clear from this video, you can comment it down. I will respond either in a comment if it's something easy or in a video, and I will post it. I hope you learned something, and have a great day or night or whatever it is in the corner of the world that you are from. Bye bye.